"Did you like your Mother's Day gift?" my daughter asked, smiling as she handed me a small bag. I looked at it, then back at her. "Of course," I said. "Thank you." Just minutes earlier, the room had erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, glasses clinked. My daughter had just presented her mother-in-law with a $40,000 diamond ring and announced a luxury cruise she had booked for the two of them. 7 days, sailing the Mediterranean. All inclusive. Everyone stood to hug her. Someone wiped away tears. I stayed seated. If you're here with me, stay until the end of this story. And tell me where you're listening from. I never imagined how far something so small could travel. It was Mother's Day, and I had arrived early, as I always did. I brought a fruit tart from the bakery down the street and a card I had written the night before. My handwriting slower now than it used to be. I wore the blue cardigan my late husband once said made my eyes look brighter. I didn't expect anything extravagant. I never had. Mother's Day, to me, was about being remembered. The living room was crowded, flowers everywhere, gift bags stacked neatly by the sofa. My daughter moved gracefully through the space, confident, practiced. She had planned everything. The lunch, the seating, the moment. When it was time, she asked everyone to gather. Her voice was bright, proud. She went first to her husband's mother. "This is just a small token," she said, lifting the velvet box. The ring caught the light instantly. Someone gasped. Someone else asked how many carats. My daughter laughed and waved it off, then announced the cruise. The room swelled with admiration. I clapped with everyone else. Slowly, carefully. Then she turned to me. "There you go, Mom," she said, placing the bag in my hands. It was light. Very light. I didn't open it right away. I held it the way you hold something you don't want to drop, even if it doesn't matter much. The room was quieter now, not silent, just thinner. Inside was a plastic keychain, pink, shiny, the kind you find near the checkout counter. A sticker on the back said $9.99. I smiled. I always smile first. "Thank you," I said. "It's thoughtful." No one laughed. No one commented. The moment moved on, smoothly, like it had been rehearsed that way. Plates were passed. A toast was proposed. Conversation picked up again. I sat there, the keychain resting in my palm, and waited for the feeling to pass. Sometimes it does. My daughter didn't look at me again for a while. My son stayed busy refilling drinks. Someone asked me if I wanted more iced tea. I said no. As I watched them, I tried to understand what I had missed. I replayed the years quietly in my mind. The weekends I took the kids so they could travel. The down payment I helped with when they bought their first house. The afternoons I spent waiting in school parking lots just in case. I had never kept score. I didn't know I was supposed to. The keychain pressed into my skin as I closed my hand around it. It wasn't anger I felt. Not exactly. It was something colder, more precise. For the first time, I wondered if this had nothing to do with money at all. I didn't say anything that day. I finished my lunch. I complimented the dessert. I hugged everyone goodbye and drove home alone, the radio off, the bag sitting on the passenger seat. That night, I placed the keychain on my kitchen counter and stood there looking at it for a long time. Something had shifted, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. The next morning, I woke before the sun. The house was quiet in that way it only is when no one needs anything from you. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I didn't finish, watching the light slowly stretch across the floor. The keychain was still on the counter where I had left it, catching the faint glow like it wanted to be noticed. I picked it up once, then set it back down. For years, mornings like this had been full. School lunches to pack. Shoes to find. Voices calling from other rooms. Even after my husband passed, there was still noise. Phone calls, errands. Grandchildren dropped off with quick instructions and quicker goodbyes. Lately, there had been more silence. I thought about Mother's Day again, not the gifts, but the order of things. How carefully it had all been arranged. Who stood where, who spoke first, who was celebrated, and who was thanked last, briefly, like an afterthought. I rinsed my cup and placed it in the sink. I noticed my hands moved more slowly now. Not weak, just deliberate. Later that afternoon, my daughter called. "Did you get home okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said. Everything was fine. "I hope you liked your gift," she added quickly. I know it wasn't much, but I thought it was cute. "It was," I said, and I meant the word, even if not the meaning she hoped for. She didn't ask about my drive, or if I was tired. She told me instead about the cruise itinerary. The ports, the views, how excited her mother-in-law had been. I listened. I always had. When the call ended, I sat very still. It wasn't the first time I'd been made small without a word being said. It had just been easier before to explain it away. Busy lives, different priorities. I told myself I understood. That afternoon, I opened a drawer in the hallway cabinet. Inside were old envelopes, bank statements, documents I hadn't looked at in years. I wasn't searching for anything specific. I just wanted to see what was there. I remembered the first check I'd written to help them with the house. How my daughter had hugged me then. How grateful she'd sounded. I remembered babysitting during renovations, sleeping on the couch so they could have the bedroom, being told, "We couldn't do this without you." I believed that meant something permanent. In the evening, I took a walk around the block. The weather was mild. A neighbor waved. I waved back. She asked how my family was doing. "They're well," I said. At home, I made a simple dinner and ate standing at the counter. I didn't bother setting the table. There was no one to impress, no one to wait for. Before bed, I picked up the keychain again. It was still shiny, untouched. I turned it over and over in my fingers. It wasn't the price that lingered in my thoughts. It was the care, the absence of it. I placed it back on the counter, but this time I didn't look away. That night, I didn't sleep much. I wasn't upset. I was alert. Something had shifted, and it wasn't loud. It was quiet, like a door closing somewhere deep inside the house, one I hadn't realized was still open. By morning, I knew one thing clearly. I would pay closer attention from now on. A week later, my son stopped by. He didn't call ahead. He rarely did anymore. I heard his car before the doorbell rang and felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the one that used to mean anticipation. Now it just meant adjustment. "You look tired," he said as he stepped inside. "I didn't sleep much," I replied. He glanced at the kitchen counter, then away. His eyes paused where the keychain still sat. He didn't comment. We sat at the table. He talked about work, about deadlines, about how busy everything had become. I nodded at the right moments, poured him coffee, listened. At some point, he mentioned the cruise. "Mom's really excited," he said. "She's never been to Europe." "I'm glad," I said. And I was, or at least I wanted to be. There was a pause then, the kind that waits for something else to be said. It wasn't. "Everything okay?" he asked, finally. "Yes," I said. "Why wouldn't it be?" He shrugged. "You seemed quiet at the party." I was tired. He accepted that easily. Too easily. When he left, I watched from the window as he backed out of the driveway. I noticed how quickly he pulled away, as if there was somewhere more important to be. I stood there longer than I needed to, my reflection faint in the glass. That afternoon, I went through old photo albums, not out of nostalgia, out of habit. Page after page of birthdays, holidays, school. I was always there, standing just off to the side, holding a coat, watching. There were fewer photos of me as the years went on. Later, my daughter texted, a picture, her mother-in-law trying on the ring again, smiling brightly. The caption read, "Still can't believe it." I didn't respond. Instead, I noticed something else. The way messages had changed, shorter now. Functional. Requests came through quickly. Could I watch the kids? Could I help next weekend? Could I cover something until they sorted it out? There was affection in the words, but it felt practiced, like a script that still worked because I had never refused before. That evening, I received a call from a neighbor. She had seen my daughter's post and wanted to know where I was going on my trip. "I'm not," I said. "Oh," she replied, surprised. "I assumed." "So did everyone else," I said softly. After the call, I sat down and made a list. Not of grievances, of facts. What I gave, what I was asked for, what I received in return. Seeing it written out changed something. Not dramatically. Just enough. I wasn't angry. I was clear. The next day, I put the keychain in a drawer. Not out of bitterness, out of order. It no longer needed to be visible. I began to notice things I had once ignored. How decisions were made without me. How plans were announced, not discussed. How my role had quietly shifted from mother to convenience. No one had told me. They didn't have to. That night, as I turned off the lights, I realized I had stopped waiting. For calls? For thanks. For recognition. I slept better. In the morning, I woke with a thought that stayed with me all day. They hadn't changed overnight. I had just finally noticed. A few days later, I drove past the old neighborhood where we used to live. I hadn't planned to. I was running errands, took a wrong turn, and didn't correct it. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The tree we planted the year my son started kindergarten had grown tall enough to shade the entire front yard. I parked across the street and sat there with the engine off. That was where it all began, the years when being a mother meant being needed. When my opinion mattered because decisions hadn't been made yet. When I was consulted, not informed. I remembered the nights I stayed up sewing costumes for school plays. The weekends we skipped vacations so we could save for college. The way my husband used to say, "She holds this family together," when people complimented our home. After he passed, I became quieter, but I stayed available. I filled the gaps he left behind. I thought that was what love did. On the drive home, I stopped at the grocery store. I ran into an old friend from church. She hugged me tightly and asked about my grandchildren. Then she lowered her voice. "I saw the photos," she said. "The ring is beautiful." "Yes," I replied. She hesitated. "I didn't see you in the pictures much." "I was there," I said. She smiled politely, but her eyes told me she understood more than she said. That evening, I sat down with a notebook and began writing dates. Not emotions, just moments. Times when I had stepped in without being asked. Times when help had been expected, not appreciated. Times when decisions had already been finalized before I was told. I noticed how often it happened after my husband was gone. The shift had been gradual, subtle enough that I blamed myself for feeling it. I told myself I was imagining things, that this was just how families changed. But families don't change by accident. They change because someone rearranges the room. I thought back to Mother's Day again. Not the gifts, but the language. Just a small token. I know it's not much. Words chosen carefully, not careless, convenient. It wasn't thoughtless, it was precise. The realization didn't hurt the way I expected. It settled, like a weight you finally acknowledge you've been carrying. Later that night, my daughter sent another message. A question this time. Could I help watch the kids the following weekend? They had plans. Something important. I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. "Let me check my schedule," I typed. It was the first time I hadn't answered immediately. I placed the phone face down and went to wash the dishes. The water was warm, the routine familiar, but something inside me had shifted position. I wasn't angry. I wasn't resentful. I was aware. Before bed, I opened the drawer where I'd put the keychain. I didn't take it out. I just confirmed it was there, then closed the drawer again. I didn't need reminders anymore. That night, I dreamed of nothing at all. And when I woke up, I understood something clearly. Being a mother had never required me to disappear. I had just allowed it to happen. The following week moved differently. Nothing dramatic happened. No arguments, no confrontations, just small moments that stood out now that I was paying attention. My daughter called on Tuesday. She didn't ask how I was. She went straight into her request. Could I stay overnight with the kids on Saturday? They had an early flight the next morning. She spoke quickly, confidently, as if the answer had already been decided. "I'll think about it," I said. There was a pause, a short one, but noticeable. "Okay," she replied carefully. "Just let me know." After we hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand longer than usual. I wasn't trying to make a point. I was listening to myself for the first time. On Thursday, I ran into my daughter-in-law's mother at the pharmacy. She recognized me immediately and smiled warmly. "You must be so excited about the cruise," she said. "It's such a generous gift." He said, "It is." She went on about the ship, the dining rooms, the excursions. She spoke as if I were part of it, as if this were a shared family moment. I didn't correct her. That evening, I received a group message. Plans for the weekend. Times. Drop-offs. Instructions. My name appeared at the bottom, last on the list. I read it twice. This time, I didn't answer right away. I thought about all the weekends I had rearranged my life without hesitation. How often I had been available because it felt like love, because it felt easier than explaining. That night, I opened my calendar and wrote things down. Not obligations. My own plans. A lunch with a friend. A doctor's appointment I had postponed twice. A quiet afternoon marked simply as rest. I realized I had never scheduled my life before. I had only filled in the spaces left by others. On Friday morning, my son called. "Did you see the message?" he asked. Yes, I said. Great. So we'll drop the kids around 6? I won't be able to this weekend, I replied. Another pause. Longer this time. Oh, he said. Why not? I already have plans. He didn't ask what they were. Well, he said slowly, we'll have to figure something out. I'm sure you will, I said. After the call, I stood by the window and watched the mail truck pull away. I felt steady. Not proud. Not guilty. Just steady. Later that afternoon, my daughter sent another message. Shorter. Polite. Thanking me for letting them know. No apology. No concern. Just adjustment. That was when it became clear. They weren't upset because they missed me. They were unsettled because I was no longer predictable. I spent Saturday morning walking through the park. The air was cool. Families passed by. I sat on a bench and watched children play, their laughter floating freely. No one needed anything from me in that moment. It felt unfamiliar, but not wrong. That evening, I cooked dinner for myself and ate slowly at the table with the lights on. I didn't check my phone. For the first time in a long while, the silence felt earned. And as I washed the dishes, I understood something quietly but completely. They had never asked how much I could give. They had only learned how much I always did. The change didn't go unnoticed. By the following week, the calls became shorter, less casual, more careful. My daughter still reached out, but her voice carried a different tone now, as if she were measuring her words before letting them fall. We might need help next month, she said one afternoon. Just letting you know. Okay, I replied. There was nothing else to add. I began to notice how often just letting you know had once meant, we've already decided. Now it meant uncertainty, a pause where there hadn't been one before. On Wednesday, I met my sister for lunch. We hadn't seen each other in months. Life had a way of filling my time without asking permission. She studied my face as we sat down. You look different, she said. Do I? Yes, she said. Calmer. I smiled, not because it was a compliment, but because it felt accurate. She asked about Mother's Day. I told her only what was necessary. The ring, the cruise, the keychain. She shook her head but didn't speak. We ate in silence for a moment, the kind that doesn't rush to fill itself. Later that day, my son stopped by again. This time, he called first. I just wanted to check in, he said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. Make sure you're okay. I am, I said. He looked around the kitchen, as if searching for something familiar, something missing. You've been busy lately, he said. I've had things to do. He nodded slowly. Mom mentioned you weren't available last weekend. Yes. Another pause. He sat down at the table, hands folded, the way he used to when he was younger and unsure of how a conversation would go. Did we do something wrong? He asked. I looked at him for a long moment. Not with anger, with clarity. No, I said. You did what you thought was right. He didn't know how to respond to that. I just want you to know, he added quickly. We appreciate everything you've done. I know, I said, but appreciation spoken after the fact carries a different weight. After he left, I noticed how quiet the house felt again. Not empty, settled. That evening, I took out the notebook I had been keeping. I added one more line. A simple observation. Nothing emotional, just true. When I stopped filling every gap, they noticed the space. The following days passed gently. No urgent requests, no last-minute changes. Just distance. Not dramatic, not hostile, adjusting. On Sunday morning, I went to church alone. I sat in my usual seat. After the service, a woman I barely knew squeezed my hand and said, Happy Mother's Day, even if it's late. Thank you, I replied. She didn't know anything about the gifts, or the ring, or the cruise. She just saw me. That was enough. At home, I cleaned the house slowly, opened windows, let fresh air move through rooms that had once felt crowded with expectations. I found myself humming without realizing it. In the evening, my daughter sent a message, a photo of the kids. No request attached. Just the picture. I replied with a heart. Nothing more. I wasn't pulling away. I was standing where I had always been, just no longer bending forward to be seen. And for the first time in years, that felt like balance. By the end of the month, patterns became easier to see, not because anyone explained them to me, but because no one tried to hide them anymore. My daughter stopped calling unless there was a reason, not a conversation, a purpose. When she did reach out, her voice sounded polite, almost formal, as if we were no longer improvising, but following a script we both understood. One afternoon, she asked if I still had the paperwork from years ago, the documents related to the house, the help I had given when they were just starting out. "I think so," I said. "Good," she replied. "We might need it." She didn't say why. She didn't need to. After the call, I opened the filing cabinet in the spare room. The drawers slid out stiffly, unused for too long. Inside were folders I had labeled in my husband's handwriting. Dates, names, careful notes in the margins. I sat on the floor and went through them one by one. There were records of checks, loan agreements that had never been formalized, notes that said temporary and will settle later, promises made casually when trust filled in the gaps where contracts should have been. I realized how much of my life had been built on assumptions. That evening, my son called again. His tone was lighter this time, as if he were trying to restore something familiar. "Mom's been talking about the cruise nonstop," he said. "She keeps asking if you're okay with everything." "I am," I said. "You know she didn't mean anything by it," he added quickly. "The gifts, I mean." "I know what she meant," I replied. He was quiet. "I just don't want there to be tension," he said. "There isn't," I said. And it was true. Tension requires resistance. I wasn't resisting anymore. After the call, I made tea and carried it into the living room. I sat in the chair by the window, the one my husband used to sit in. Outside, the street was calm, ordinary. People coming home from work, children riding bikes. I thought about how often I had softened my words to keep the peace, how I had explained things away for the sake of harmony, how I had accepted less because it seemed easier than asking for more. Peace, I realized, was something I had been maintaining alone. A few days later, a small envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a postcard from my daughter-in-law's mother, a photo of the ocean, a short message about how beautiful everything looked. No mention of me, no greeting, just a description of the view. I placed the postcard on the counter and went about my day. Later, my sister called. "They'll come around," she said gently, after I told her how things had been. "I'm not waiting," I replied. She didn't argue. That weekend, I declined another request. This one came wrapped in compliments and apologies. I read the message twice before responding. "I won't be able to." I wrote, no explanation, no apology. The reply came quickly, a thumbs-up emoji. I stared at it longer than I should have. It was the first time I understood something clearly, how easily my absence could be accepted once my availability was no longer guaranteed. That night, I slept deeply. The next morning, I woke with a sense of order. Not excitement, not relief, just order. I wasn't being pushed out. I was stepping back into myself. And for the first time since my husband died, I felt something return that I hadn't known was missing. Not attention, authority, quiet, unspoken, undeniable. It had always been mine. I had just forgotten to stand where it could be felt. The first sign came quietly. It wasn't a call or a message directed at me. It was something I overheard by accident. I was at the grocery store, reaching for a loaf of bread when I heard my daughter's voice a few aisles over. She was speaking to someone I didn't recognize. Her tone was light, almost amused. "We'll have to adjust," she said. "She's not as flexible as she used to be." I stopped moving. "She?" the other woman asked. "My mom," my daughter replied. "She used to help with everything. Now she's selective. Selective." I didn't turn around. I didn't need to see her face. The words told me enough. On the drive home, I kept the radio off. I let the quiet settle. Selective wasn't an insult. It was an admission. It meant she had noticed. It meant the pattern had been broken. Later that evening, my son called. "We might need to move some things around financially," he said carefully. "Just temporarily." "What kind of things?" I asked. He hesitated. "Nothing urgent, just planning." "I see," I said. He filled the silence with explanations. Market conditions, unexpected expenses, long-term strategy, words stacked neatly one on top of another. I listened. Then I said nothing. After the call ended, I went back to the spare room and opened the filing cabinet again. This time, I wasn't reminiscing. I was reviewing. Each document had a weight to it now. Not emotional, practical. I noticed what was missing as much as what was there. That night, I received another message from my daughter. A photo from the cruise this time. The ocean at sunset. No caption. I looked at it for a long moment, then set my phone down without replying. The next day, I met with someone I trusted, not for advice, for clarity. We spoke calmly, reviewed numbers, dates, boundaries that had never been written down but had always existed in practice. When I left, I felt lighter. Not relieved, aligned. By the weekend, the tone of communication had shifted again, softer, more careful. My daughter asked if I was free sometime next week. No assumptions, just a question. "I'll let you know," I said. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table and thought about Mother's Day. Not the gifts, the order, the presentation, the way value had been assigned publicly and without hesitation. It hadn't been an oversight. It had been a statement, and statements can be revised. I placed the keychain on the table in front of me for the first time in weeks. I looked at it closely. The plastic was still smooth, unused, exactly as it had been. It wasn't worthless. It was symbolic. I put it back in the drawer and closed it gently. Outside, the sun was setting. The house felt steady, grounded, not waiting for anything. For the first time, I understood the full shape of what had happened. I hadn't been overlooked. I had been measured. And now, so had they. From that moment on, every interaction carried a new awareness. Not suspicion, awareness. They spoke differently, asked differently, waited for answers that used to come automatically. I didn't announce any changes. I simply continued as I was. And somehow that was enough to change everything. Clarity has a way of rearranging memory. Once I stopped questioning myself, the past began to line up neatly. Moments I had brushed aside returned with sharper edges. Not to hurt me, but to explain things. I remembered the first time my daughter had introduced me to someone as the kid's grandma instead of my mom. The time she suggested I sit near the end of the table because it was more comfortable. The way decisions were announced casually, as if my agreement were implied by my presence. I had mistaken inclusion for importance. One afternoon, my daughter invited me over for coffee, just the two of us. No kids, no distractions. She spoke carefully, choosing her words with the same precision I now recognized. "I hope you know we appreciate you," she said, stirring her cup. "You've always been supportive. Supportive. Not central, not essential. Supportive." "I know," I replied. She smiled, relieved, as if that had been the correct answer. She talked about balancing priorities, about how complicated life had become, about needing to focus on what made sense for her family. Her family. The phrase landed gently but firmly. I listened without interrupting. When I left, she hugged me quickly. The way you hug someone you respect but don't want to owe. On the drive home, I realized something quietly. They hadn't stopped loving me. They had simply redefined me. That evening, my son called. He wanted to review something financial, just to make sure we were all on the same page. His tone was careful again, polite, almost formal. "We assumed you'd want things handled a certain way," he said. "I understand," I replied. He waited. I could hear it in his breathing, the expectation of reassurance, of permission. But I didn't give either. After the call, I sat in the living room and looked around. The furniture I had chosen, the photos I had framed, the quiet order of a life I had built slowly, deliberately. I thought about how often I had stepped aside so others could step forward, how rarely anyone had asked me to stay where I was. It wasn't resentment I felt, it was recognition. They valued me as long as I remained useful. They respected me as long as I didn't require consideration, and they were comfortable as long as I didn't change. Understanding this didn't harden me. It steadied me. The next message from my daughter arrived that night. A simple question. Could we talk later in the week? No urgency. No reason given. Sure, I replied. I set the phone down and went to prepare dinner. The motions were familiar, the rhythm grounding. I ate slowly, savoring the quiet. For years, I had mistaken silence for peace. I now understood the difference. Peace doesn't ask you to disappear. Later, as I washed the dishes, I caught my reflection in the window. Older. Yes, but not smaller. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself, or soften my thoughts, or make space where none had been offered. They knew where I stood now. And more importantly, so did I. I turned off the lights and walked down the hallway, past the drawer where the keychain rested, past the filing cabinet filled with unspoken agreements. Nothing needed to be said. The balance had shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. And in that shift, I found something I hadn't realized I was missing. Not validation, authority, the kind that comes from seeing clearly and no longer pretending otherwise. The meeting happened on a Tuesday, My daughter asked if we could talk in person. She suggested a cafe near her office, somewhere neutral. Quiet. I arrived early and chose a table near the window. Old habits. I liked to see who was coming before they reached me. She arrived exactly on time. "You look well," she said, setting her bag down. "Thank you," I replied. We ordered coffee. She spoke first, easing into the conversation as if approaching shallow water. She talked about the kids, about schedules, about how fast time was moving. Then she stopped. "We've been doing some planning," she said. "Long term." I waited. "You know, finances, responsibilities, expectations," she continued. "We just want to make sure everyone is comfortable." Everyone. Another careful word. "I'm comfortable," I said. She smiled, but it didn't last. "That's good," she said. "We just thought it might be helpful to clarify things." Clarify meant redefine. I knew that now. She spoke about efficiency, about fairness, about what made sense at this stage. She didn't mention Mother's Day. She didn't mention the ring or the cruise. Those things had already been filed away as irrelevant. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, she looked at me with a familiar expression. The one that waited for reassurance, for agreement, for me to make things easier. "I've been thinking as well," I said. Her posture shifted slightly. "I've realized I need to be more intentional," I continued, "with my time, with my resources." She nodded quickly. "Of course, that's important." "Yes," I said, "it is." There was a pause, not uncomfortable, just revealing. She asked a few more questions, carefully phrased, hypothetical, what I might want, how I imagined the future. I answered honestly but briefly. When the conversation ended, she reached for her bag and stood. "I'm glad we talked," she said. "So am I replied. Outside, the air felt cooler, clearer. I walked to my car without hurry. That evening, my son called. He referenced the meeting without mentioning it directly. He spoke about alignment, about making sure no one felt taken for granted. "I understand," I said. He waited again, for reassurance, for absolution. "I trust you'll make good decisions," I added. That seemed to satisfy him. After the call, I went into the spare room and pulled out a folder I had set aside earlier that week. Inside were copies, notes, decisions already made quietly, responsibly, without drama. I hadn't announced anything. I hadn't threatened anything. I had simply prepared. In the days that followed, the tone shifted once more. Invitations came with notice. Requests came with alternatives. Questions replaced assumptions. No one commented on the change. At home, I moved things around, donated what I no longer needed, organized what remained. The house felt lighter. So did I. One afternoon, I found the keychain again while cleaning out the drawer. I held it for a moment, then placed it back where it belonged. It no longer held any weight. The balance had been reset, not by confrontation, but by clarity, by restraint, by understanding what was mine to give and what was not. That night, as I turned off the lights, I thought about Mother's Day. Not with bitterness, with precision. It had been the moment everything became visible. And once something is visible, it can be dealt with quietly, effectively. I slept deeply. In the morning, the house was calm. My phone was still. No urgent messages, no expectations pressing against the day. Just time, and the quiet certainty that whatever came next, I would meet it standing exactly where I belonged. It didn't happen all at once. The shift showed itself in small, practical ways. Invitations arrived earlier. Questions were phrased more carefully. When plans changed, I was told, not informed after the fact. One afternoon, my daughter stopped by with the children. No request attached. No errand waiting at the end of the visit. Just time. "They missed you?" she said, watching them run ahead into the living room. "I missed them too," I replied. She stayed for coffee. Sat at the table instead of standing near the door. She talked about school projects, about schedules, about things that no longer needed my approval, but seemed to want my presence. I listened. At one point, she paused and looked around the room. "You've changed things," she said. "Yes," I replied. She nodded slowly. "It looks nice." She didn't ask why. I didn't explain. A week later, my son called to tell me about a decision they had made regarding finances. Not to ask, to inform me. Clearly, respectfully. He outlined it carefully, leaving space for questions. "I appreciate you telling me," I said. There was relief in his voice. After the call, I sat with that feeling for a moment. Not satisfaction, recognition. They weren't doing this out of fear. They were doing it out of adjustment. The children stayed over one Saturday night. My daughter asked ahead of time, gave details, offered alternatives if I wasn't up for it. I said yes because I wanted to. That made all the difference. We baked cookies, watched a movie, the usual things. But the tone was different. I wasn't filling in. I was participating. Later, after they were asleep, I stood in the kitchen and listened to the quiet. It felt familiar again, but not demanding. The next morning, my daughter hugged me longer than usual. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" I asked. "For being here," she replied. She didn't say always. She didn't say everything. Just here. After they left, I cleaned up slowly, put the dishes away, folded blankets. I noticed how naturally the rhythm returned when I allowed it to be chosen, not assumed. That afternoon, I received a message from my daughter-in-law's mother. A polite note. A few lines. She hoped I was well. Mentioned the cruise in passing. Asked if I'd like to get coffee sometime when they returned. I read it once. Then again. I didn't answer immediately. Not because I was unsure, because I no longer rushed. In the evening, I sat down with my notebook and added one final observation. Respect didn't arrive when I demanded it. It arrived when I stopped negotiating my place. I closed the notebook and put it away. The house felt settled, complete. I wasn't waiting for anything now. Not apologies, not gestures, not recognition wrapped in ribbon. I had stepped fully back into my life, and others had adjusted accordingly. Later that night, I stood at the window and looked out at the quiet street. Lights on, lights off. People living their evenings without knowing anything about the shifts that had occurred inside my walls. That was fine. The most important changes don't need witnesses. They just need consistency. And I had learned that, not loudly, not publicly, but thoroughly. The kind of lesson that stays with you, long after the moment that first revealed it has passed. Mother's Day came around again the following year. This time, there was no announcement, no grand gesture, no audience waiting to be impressed. I spent the morning at home. I watered the plants by the window and opened the curtains wide. Sunlight filled the room slowly, the way it always had. I made myself breakfast and ate at the table, not rushing, not checking the clock. My phone buzzed once, a simple message from my daughter. "Happy Mother's Day. We're thinking of you." A few minutes later, another from my son. "Hope you're having a good morning, Mom. No photos, no comparisons, no explanations." Later that afternoon, they came by. All of them, not early, not late, just on time. The children ran ahead as they always did. My daughter followed, carrying a small box. Nothing extravagant, nothing light enough to feel dismissive. "This is for you," she said, handing it to me. I opened it carefully. Inside was a simple bracelet, silver, unassuming, the kind you wear every day without thinking about it. Alongside it was a card, handwritten. "Thank you for being our mother." No qualifiers, no footnotes. I smiled, not because of the gift, because of the balance. We sat together that afternoon, talked, ate, laughed at ordinary things. No one performed. No one measured the moment. It passed the way meaningful moments often do, quietly. At one point, my daughter-in-law complimented the house. Asked how I had found the time to reorganize everything. "I made time," I said. She nodded, as if that explained more than I had said. When they left, I stood at the door and waved until the car disappeared down the street. I didn't feel emptied afterward. I didn't feel drained. I felt complete. That evening, I opened the drawer one last time. The keychain was still there. I held it in my hand for a moment, not with anger, not with sadness, with gratitude. It had never been about the object. It had been about the moment it created, the one that forced me to see clearly. I placed it back and closed the drawer. Some lessons don't arrive gently, but they leave you steadier than before. I thought about all the years I had believed being a good mother meant staying silent, being flexible, being grateful for whatever was given. I had learned something else. Being a mother does not mean shrinking to fit where you're placed. It means standing where you belong. I put on the bracelet and looked at myself in the mirror. Older, yes, but grounded, certain. I turned off the lights and sat by the window as night settled in. The house was quiet again, but this time, the quiet felt chosen, and that made all the difference.